Deadpool director Tim Miller has rejected the idea that comic book movies are on a downward trend. And then he also says he wants superhero films to explore more genres. Let's get into this here. During an appearance on Collider Dailies, Miller was asked by Collider's Stephen Weintraub, the last few years, the comic book movie genre, superhero genre, has shown signs of slowing down, and I feel like there is a sense of audience fatigue. So, do you think the comic book movie has reached its peak and is on its way down, or do you still think there is a lot of life left in the genre? This is what Miller answered. He said, I think there's tons of life left in the genre because, as a comic book fan, as you are, Steve, you know that superhero movies, superhero comics are only kind of the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of other stories to be told, just like there's all kinds of movies. Men and women in tights are not the only kinds of comic books to be made, The Goon being the most obvious one I'm associated with. So I believe there are so many different types of stories. I still get my monthly pull. I still get a box of comics. And half of them are superhero stuff and the others are different kinds of stories, from science fiction to period pieces to horror. So I think that there's tons of room if you say comic books. However, he did specifically address superheroes, and he said, if you say superhero movies, I do think that there's a limit to how much people can enjoy. That said, I don't know that we've reached that limit because there's so many good stories to tell and different kinds. He continues saying, The Authority is my favorite comic of all time. There hasn't been a version of that made. I'm sure Warner Brothers is working on it, but it's so adult and so violent. The Boys comes pretty close to television, but it hasn't been done in feature yet. Indeed, James Gunn did announce that they are working on an Authority film as part of his DCU slate. It's supposed to be the second feature film following Superman Legacy, if you are to believe his DCU slate announcement at the end of January this year. As far as there being lots of life left in the genre, I actually probably do indeed agree with him. Although I do think that there has been so many poor quality films, it has waned on a lot of people, and they're looking for something better, and they're looking for different genres, I think, to provide that to them, because the superhero genre is no longer providing that. The quality of films is just extremely poor. And you can see the results of the films this year. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 had less box office revenue, less tickets sold than both the first Guardians of the Galaxy and the second one. You saw movies like Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania lose money, Blue Beetle lose money. People just aren't going to see these films. They are not interested in them because I think they've been burned on too many poor quality films made by both Marvel and DC. Obviously, Shazam! Fury of the Gods is in there as well, as is The Flash. And we still have two films left to go from both Marvel and DC. You've got Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom from DC, and The Marvels from Marvel Studios. But Miller wasn't done. He would later be asked what he would like to see Marvel and DC do, to which he said, I would like to see them expand to other genres. Even if you're a Marvel fan, there's horror in the Marvel universe. There's other types of tropes. I'm hoping that, and I'm sure it will, is they keep expanding their rationale. I actually think this is something that they can easily do. There's plenty of different types of horror or genres that you can do. You can obviously do horror. It looks like James Gunn wants to do something like that with Swamp Thing. They actually did have a pretty decent horror supernatural vibe going on with the Swamp Thing television show from James Wan, and then who's the Aquaman director, and then they decided to scrap that for whatever reason, as they were going through a lot of big transitioning there. So there is lots of room for that. Obviously, Marvel has stuff like that too, with Man-Thing, and they can do some kind of like horror stuff. But I think DC is probably more well known for the horror. There's lots of supernatural things that they can do. The Spectre is just kind of sitting on a shelf. Zatanna is sitting on a shelf. You have a lot of that stuff kind of just sitting there for DC. They're not even actually tapping into it. You have police procedurals that you could do with Martian Manhunter. I know I've seen police procedural type stories with him. Obviously, Green Lantern fits right into that. Batman could fit into something like that as well, but we don't really see anything like that. They don't really get into that. I think we got a little bit of that with Matt Reeves' The Batman in the first two acts of that movie, where it was actually pretty interesting, and then they completely fell apart in the third act. So I definitely think that is something that they could definitely do. Definitely dive into a lot more different superhero genres that they could do. And I know Kevin Feige has made noise about that in the past, but I just don't really feel that they've kind of pulled that off. You had Ant-Man kind of giving us the heist type films and things like that, but we haven't really gotten anything like that. They've tried to do some kind of like spy drama stuff with Secret Invasion, and it just was really poorly executed. They did it really well with Captain America: The Winter Soldier, but we haven't really seen anything like that since from either Marvel or DC. So I definitely agree with him there. He goes on and says, the brilliant thing that Fox discovered that allowed me to make the Deadpool movie was we can make R-rated superhero movies and nobody else is doing that. And nobody else really thought they could do that. I find that just bizarre kind of reasoning given the fact that we had R-rated superhero films, Blade being the one that comes to mind, obviously, in the late 90s. You have Dread as well, which was an R-rated film. Obviously didn't perform very well at the box office. Blade obviously did perform well. Got 2 sequels. But I think I could probably agree with him that at that time, what was it, 2018 or whatever it was with Deadpool, yeah, no one was really making R-rated superhero movies for sure. It was very PG-13 MCU stuff. Batman, I think, even was PG-13 as well with the Nolan stuff, but it was obviously a little bit darker, a little bit grimier. And I think they started venturing into some of the R-rated animated stuff on the end with like Killing Joke and stuff like that. But the R-rated on that was appalling what they did in that. It should have been X-rated. But anyways, and nobody else really thought they could do that. And Deadpool got lucky and opened up that genre. Again, I don't think it really did. Maybe it reopened it maybe because again, I think you had Blade being R, you had Dread. Obviously, Dread didn't perform very well at the box office, but it clearly had a really strong cult following that formed after it. If you looked at the Blu-ray and DVD sales, they're almost half of what the box office was, which you almost never see from feature films. But anyways, he goes on and says, you can have a film like The Joker because suddenly everybody realized you could have an R-rated movie. Kind of weird that he's trying to take credit for DC going after doing The Joker after that. I'm not sure if I actually believe that. But if you want to read the rest of this article, I got some comments from James Gunn, Mark Miller, comic book writer, and Chuck Dixon, all kind of weighing in on this. James Gunn seems to kind of agree, saying the same things as what Tim Miller here is saying. But you also have Mark Miller saying basically, hey, superhero time is over. It had its run. They're going to try and get it back to it, and they might have some plans to do that. But he said it's over after Avengers Endgame. And Chuck Dixon is looking at it as more of like a cyclical thing. You had Westerns, you had spies, superhero just had its time, and it's going to fade in, and there'll be something else that takes its place. We don't know what that is yet. It looks like action movies might be back on the table. We're seeing those do really well over on Netflix, and we're seeing them kind of constantly being churned out. Equalizer 3 did pretty well. Whether or not they're going to be the massive box office juggernauts that we saw with the MCU, we'll see if that happens. But he definitely sees it as something cyclical, and we'll probably see a different genre come to the top. But that's what Tim Miller had to say about the superhero genre, about comic book movies. I guess I have one last thing to say. I do think that there is plenty of room for different comic book movie opportunities. One thing that I would really love to see is kind of maybe a supernatural Western. Cullen Bunn has an absolutely excellent comic book series called Sixth Gun, which I think could be a really good movie series or a TV series. Really, really well written. So there's like really cool things that you can do like that. So I think there's like a lot of fun things that you can do. Obviously, you have like Road to Perdition and things like that where they were comic book movies and they did get, they already were made into movies and they're like period pieces. So you have things like that too that you could do. And you even have like Chicago Typewriter from my friend Brandon Fiatino, which got basically aped by a South Korean TV production, which is kind of like a supernatural crime thriller. And you have things like that too that could be really fun. So there's lots of different comic books out there with lots of different stories. Remember, comic book is really a medium. It's not a genre, and you can tell lots of different stories within the medium, just like you can on film. But I'll leave it to you. What do you make of what Tim Miller had to say about superhero movies and comic book movies, and what do you think about them?
Subscribe for more.